If you've ever called a doctor's office and waited on hold for 11 minutes just to book an appointment, you've lived a problem today's guest is being paid to eliminate. Assort Health is the AI platform automating that entire experience. And in 2 years, they've handled over 190 million patient interactions, worked with 12,000 providers, cut hold times by 75%, and they've just recently raised their Series C with $120 million at a $1.2 billion valuation. They were also named to the CV Insights 2026 AI 100. My guest today, Imaad Rashied, is VP of Health Systems at Assort Health. Before Assort, he spent 7 years at Cubentis building AI automation into some of the largest health systems in the country. Imad was incredible, and I truly learned so much from this pod. Make sure to have your notebooks out because this was amazing. Imad, it's amazing to have you on the show, so thank you for being here today.
It's my pleasure, Vic, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, I wanted to go kind of right into it. I feel like Assort Health is meant a lot for front door, and you guys kind of help with the AI phone agents. What is the patient actually experience today when they get on a phone call with a clinic? And what are the first thought processes that the patient has? And what is the potential frustrations they might have with an AI agent where they want to quickly get to a actual person to speak to? And how does Assort best resolve that?
Yeah, I mean, so essentially the status quo of what the patient feels, whether they're calling into an individual clinic or calling into a big health system, is first a IVR system or how do I say this? Very unintelligent IVA system. And so then they're talking about, hey, press 1 for X or Y or Z, and they're being routed to the appropriate department. But even in that routing, they're spending anywhere from 5 to 40 minutes on hold, depending on how busy the clinic is. And so the number one thing and the first experience with almost every patient's interaction with healthcare is frustration. That, hey, just getting the access I need to the care that I need is taking this much time, and I'm busy. I'm at work. I'm doing this on my drive home. I've got my kid running around screaming at me while I'm trying to make this happen in office hours, and you're making me wait an hour before you talk to me, right? So that's kind of the first thing that they all experience. And then it kind of gets more frustrating from there, right? Patients' number one complaint in healthcare is having to besides the access piece, is having to repeat the same information over and over again. So then they're getting somebody who's asking not just patient identification information and verification information, but asking the same problem list again, asking the same medication list again, everything that's already documented in the EMRs. So then they're getting, that frustrating experience. And then, of course, they get an appointment that they asked for or that they think they asked for, and then they show up to a specialist, and that specialist tells them, I don't know why you were referred to me. You have sinus issues that are related to allergy, so you should be seeing an allergy specialist, not seeing me as an ENT doc. Or, yes, it is the right time to be seeing me, but you don't have the right prep. And so now let's send you on 3 to 4 weeks of tests, whether it's lab tests, stress tests, imaging, et cetera, and then you come back to me, and then we'll get your treatment going from there. And so every step of the way, the patients are met with either delays or waiting or having to navigate and become experts in their own care to get the care they need in a timely basis, which no patient is, right? They didn't spend five years in med school and residency and what have you to become experts in their care.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true. And I think you kind of hit on a good point there because holding times, I recently saw, and I think something that Assort Health really emphasizes on is about currently it's around like 11-minute hold times, and Assort Health takes it down to about a minute or even less as a big ROI. What does that look like on the financial and I guess ROI perspective for these clinics and health systems? And what is their big kind of, I guess, accountability measure for that?
Yeah. I mean, so the hold times and abandonment rates and first call resolution are important, but I think it's good to take a step back essentially and look at the access angle as well as the revenue angle, right? If you have a 100-person contact center, there's about 45% annual turnover year over year. Right. And so you're spending for replacing 45 people per year about $5,000 to $10,000 just in recruitment and hiring and training before you even count the 60 to 90-day ramp period where the new hire is actually effective at scheduling and not making the errors and creating downstream problems for everybody. So that's something that doesn't necessarily show up in the HR budget. But if you take a step further step back, it's really the revenue that walks out the door. If a patient is holding for an hour at your clinic and can't wait that long, they're going to hang up and call the next one and call the next one. Patients aren't tied to a brand in healthcare the way that they are in other organizations or in other industries. Where does everybody start their care? You go to your payer portal, whatever your employer provides, and you type in what you're looking for, and you just go down the list and call clinics, right? It's not associated with this one health systems brand or that clinic's brand. And so if your experience is bad, that's just patients and revenue walking out the door and going to your competitor across the street. And so if you think about that, you can, every abandoned call it's a referral that went out the door, but it's also a downstream procedural volume that went out the door, right? So if you have 90,000 visits you're doing a year, about 5 to 9% of those end up being actual surgeries down the road as a health system, and that's anywhere from $13,000 to $20,000 per encounter, right? So we're talking fundamental economic impact of having a poor patient experience or poor front door.
And I think you mentioned that front door. How does the kind of enablement look like for, kind of accessing health systems? And what is the kind of like, how do you guys currently, I guess, go to market with these health systems and kind of go from one to the other? And what is the kind of, I guess, challenges that you guys had to have in the past versus what you guys have now or potentially alleviating?
Yeah. I think in the past, what we were really dealing with is less sophisticated buyers that really needed to be convinced of the efficacy of this tool. I think we had an excited market when AI agents started coming out. Everybody understood how transformative the technology could be. Health systems and healthcare in general has been adopting AI faster than any other industry. However, there's natural skepticism, especially as we made the jump from deterministic models like machine learning and natural language processing, et cetera, to somewhat non-deterministic models with generative AI generative AI and agents built on top of that. And so a lot of it was actually educating and getting them comfortable with the technology. Now it's a lot more about, okay, I see 20 access companies or AI companies a week. How do you stand out? How do you differentiate? How do you show me that there's actually something real here that's worth my time versus not another commoditized play that I've talked to 3 times today already? So I think that's probably the most, if we're thinking about the market facing piece, that's probably the hardest at this point, the amount of noise that's been generated with healthcare's excitement for adopting AI.
And recently I spoke to a health system exec, and he mentioned how there's about 13 or 15 vendors that they potentially are piloting or have piloted, and they're officially customers with them. And they don't know which ones are showing sufficient ROI. And you're struggling to know if these, vendors are actually holding up to their point of maybe, decreasing readmission rates or decreasing turnover, increasing patient engagement, what have you. How does Assort specifically show the ROIs immediately, potentially to health system, since it looks like immediate ROI or 10x ROI is very important? And what are those mistakes you guys potentially made at the beginning for kind of showcasing to health systems?
It is very hard to sell to CFOs something that they cannot see on their P&L. You can create as many creative metrics as you want and say, technically, I'm driving this up or down. It's like, that's great. But ultimately, unless there is a top line impact on my P&L or a bottom line impact on my P&L, you are net cost additive, no matter what you say and what your metrics say. So the number one thing that I look at with the organizations that I lead or, products I lead is where's it going to show up on a CFO's P&L, and how little am I going to have to convince them that this impact on their P&L is directly attributable to whatever I'm talking to them about, right? And so in our workflows, how that materializes concretely is if I'm talking about capacity expansion of a resource of yours, right? And that's kind of one of the things that resonates with health systems. What is the baseline? How many calls per day is every one of your nurses or call center agents doing today as the baseline over the last fiscal year? And now in my post-intervention period, how many X higher is that? Because then I can take that multiple and I know that you as a health system have a growth goal associated with your key service lines. Meaning you're going to grow them 2 to 5% year over year, which means that this same group of call center agents will have to linearly increase their headcount to service that volume that you're going to bring in. Now, if I've added capacity in the form of number of calls handled per person per day, I can also now map that to, all right, here's where you were going to be increasing your headcount. Here's oftentimes budgets that have been submitted that no longer need to be as high as they are as a result of the work I've done. So in that sense, I've saved you on your bottom line. It's directly attributable on your P&L, and now your budgeting looks a little bit different. Further, now on the flip side, on the top line revenue piece, this is where the referrals come in, right? You're only servicing 30 to 55 of the referral volume coming in. That is the national benchmark. Everybody kind of falls within that range. Now, I expect you to do that same amount. Let's call it 50%.
Okay.
And that leads to the 90,000 appointments that you see every year and what you're projecting and what you've budgeted for next year. Now, when I say my product drives a 64% conversion on referrals and you've got 90,000 referrals sitting out there that you're not actioning upon because you only have 90,000 appointments per year, and I know I'm going to bring in 40, 45,000 additional appointments. That's as long as those appointments are booked and I can say that, hey, here's where in my platform they were booked. There's a contribution margin associated with every one of those appointments. Now, some of these service lines are contribution margin negative, so you have to use lifetime value of the patient, things like that. And then for the subspecialty surgical lines, I can then say, here's the 6 to 9% that'll translate into pure procedural volume and measure that against the procedural volume that came in. And so now that's my top line number that's hitting your P&L. And both of those are real, right? And I think I have a very big pet peeve around anybody that's cost additive to healthcare. I've been doing this for about 13, 14 years, very mission driven about it. And we do not get cost down through ethereal ROI and KPI metrics. It needs to hit the P&L somewhere. You have to be able to sit down with a sophisticated CFO and say, this is what it looks like. Here's the revenue I drove. Here's the cost that I saved, and they can budget against it.
Yeah. I mean, what are those common rejection points for these CFOs or maybe, I guess, drawback points that they kind of address to you about what, a sort can potentially cause as potential problems to my health system and how do you kind of like alleviate those points that they're kind of coming across?
I mean, the thing that everybody talks about is attribution, right? Hey, I've got 3 other projects going around referrals. I've got 3 other projects going for contact center. How do I know which piece of this pie is yours, right? And sometimes you have to, if you have the actual what is the right word? The paper trail, the audit trail, you could show them. Here are the appointments that came directly from me that would have gone elsewhere or would not have gotten serviced otherwise. Or on the flip side, hey, are you seeing this impact on your P&L next year? Yeah. All right. So you have 2 other projects going. Yeah. Okay. Even if I take a haircut and say maybe you attribute a third ROI to each one of those projects, that ROI should be positive enough to justify continuing to spend with us, right? So it's really around attribution and basically nickel and diming on attribution. Hey, how do I know it's you? And it's not that the CFOs are, combative by nature or anything like that. It's their job to protect the economics of the organization. Right. Not to ask these tough questions. In fact, the best CFOs should. It's actually poor CFOs that wouldn't or just kind of roll over and rubber stamp things. So I actually encourage everybody, just like we do and just like I've done in the past, to build alongside your CFOs. When you have your innovation cohorts, when you have your first clients, sit down with the CFO and say, okay, here are the claims we made. You're our development partner. Is it showing up? What do you need for it to believe that it's going to show up on your P&L or to believe that, it's attributable to us, et cetera. So it's really the attribution part, and I encourage everybody to co-develop with their CFO partners.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very interesting point that you mentioned. And I think one important piece of the puzzle, especially for early stage startups in healthcare, is finding those key champions and finding those people that can literally get them to the door to the CFO or CIO to actually pitch their company in a better revolutionary way. But how did you guys at Assort kind of make those champions at first or find those champions to now where you guys are at, where it's like very easly a referral?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's no substitute for blood, sweat, and tears. You just kind of have to go out there, events and conferences and local get-togethers and just talk to people, talk about the idea, validate it, and it's a numbers game. Eventually, you're going to get somebody that is interested in moving forward on it. Now, outside of that, you do need to be somewhat smart about it, right? Work smarter, not harder, and get introductions through people people.
Absolutely.
And honestly, nowadays, that's kind of the currency, right? There's so much noise in the AI ecosystem for health systems especially, that they really want to hear it on a word of mouth basis. They want to be referred by somebody they trust or know versus just some cold outreach. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the initial ones are definitely hard to get and there's no shortcut to it. You got to find enough people and talk to enough people that eventually you get to somebody who knows somebody who can get you in front of a key decision maker and then eventually it snowballs on itself. And then but that being said, health systems are multivariate, consensus-based organizations. You're never just selling through one person at a health system. So even when you have an established brand like Assort or a bigger organization, you still have to figure out how to and that's where you work with your existing champions and identify really what will help them look good to their bosses. And so it always needs to be a what's in it for me, not just the problem you're solving for them, but it's also political. And the way I like to think about it is essentially a framework in 3 steps. One, everybody's human. So identify that and identify what their motivations are, what their wants are, what their needs are, what their fears are, what they're moving towards. 2, you become valuable to them kind of independently of whatever software you're peddling, right? Or whatever problem you're trying to solve. In that you talk to them about what's on their mind, what keeps them up at night, and figure out, hey, have you tried this solution for that one problem? Have you looked at this literature around problem 2, et cetera? That establishes trust that, hey, this guy helps me regardless of my problems, and he's a trusted advisor, he's a consultant for me. And then the third part comes naturally, which is, all right, I'm going to take a bet on whatever he's talking about because he hasn't steered me wrong yet. Now that's more of a longer term relationship development play, but that works inside of an organization to multi-thread as well. They're human. Are they looking for promotions? Are they looking for publishing? Are they looking for looking better in front of 1 or 2 key leaders because they've had a messy turnover in leadership over the years and this new person doesn't know them and they want their job security? What are the other problems they're solving? The best thing you can be is a central pseudo-therapist to your champion and figure out what keeps them up at night and help them with all of their other problems. And then 3, that helps you show them how valuable your organization is and what problem you're solving for them is, and then set them up for success to introduce you to the rest of the organization. You need at least 4 to 6 people inside of a health system liking you and championing you before you can really feel confident that your deal is de-risked or your partnership is de-risked. If you're single-threaded on 1 or 2 people, I mean, you'll spend years trying to break into an organization or stay with an organization, and
Yeah.
it's a Sisyphean task.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing, and I've seen the same thing on payers too. I had a previous guest, his name is Mike Ferralli. He was the president of City Block Health, which is a Medicare, Medicaid company. And he used to work in the payer side at United. And one of the biggest things that he mentioned is if a deal or anything is not coming from word of mouth, he would just definitely never like open a cold email or never even look at one unless it's someone from a trusted source. And he kind of pointed to the exact same thing. I thought it was very interesting that you mentioned. I guess health systems and payers are kind of thinking in the same way, and especially near the kind of AI world. So it's a very interesting point that you brought up. But I kind of wanted to bring up, like you mentioned previously, you've spent like 14, 15 years in healthcare, and one of the previous companies that you worked at was Qventus. I'm curious to know like how your work at Qventus kind of helped you prepare for Assort Health. And what are those kind of operational complex challenges at Qventus that you've experienced that kind of, I guess, also prepared you for what you're doing now?
I mean, that was one of the most fruitful and challenging and informative tenures I've ever had. I spent 8 years at that company, and we did kind of everything from I was brought in to help build, design, operationalize, and stand up health system command centers, managing throughput across 13, 14 hospital health systems, managing length of stay problems, perioperative problems, and then lastly with pre-anesthesia testing and helping route patients effectively based off their risk profile. And a lot of that is, every one of those pieces informs how I developed my strategy at Assort and how we move forward here. I'd say some of the key fundamental, building blocks here have been I'm sorry, I'm going to take a second take on that one. Yeah, my experience at Qventus was transformative. I spent 8 years there, kind of working on every part of the health system value stream outside of outpatient. But I think it's the intersection of the work I did in perioperative care coordination that really translates well to some of the Assort work. Right there, we were identifying the risks profiles of the patients themselves, and then identifying the type of pre-anesthesia testing the patient needs, any additional appointments the patient needs on their preoperative journey, and then getting the patient scheduled, or at least those referrals placed or consult orders placed, and then making sure the patient's ready for pre-anesthesia testing, getting them ready for their surgery with NPO orders, things like that. And all of that is directly translatable, especially with the level of depth Assort operates at, right? We have these complex business rules for specialty care across 24 specialties and 1.8 million different business rules across each one of those, and every one of those permutations and how that manifests to the patient and routing them effectively is directly translatable with some of the work that I did at Cubentis.
I saw that you worked a lot at first at the inpatient command center and then kind of moved into perioperative care, I guess, coordination. And those sound like two different workflows. What did you kind of learn, I guess, from the second one, from from perioperative, that the first one, like inpatient command centers taught you?
Man, command centers are just a beast in itself at
Mm.
health systems. I think the way to think about it is that command center work is really around situational awareness and aggregating various signals across the hospital and health system to surface to the right people at the right time to actually act on those signals and alleviate the concern that was happening. And we were a predictive command center, right? So some of the work we were doing was counterintuitive, which was, hey, the ED is going to surge in the next 2 hours. Let me get the COO, the imaging lead, the physical therapy lead, and the labs lead all on the same nudge together to brainstorm how we're going to decant the ED to avoid the surge in 2 hours. And so the AI's job in that value stream was essentially triage. The humans were making a lot of the decision making, and we had to get to a point where we were actually suggesting actions for the humans to make or to take, but it was really just that, the AI triaging and recommending actions to take, and it was up to the humans to kind of take everything
I see.
across the finish line. On the perioperative side, it was the technology developed or progressed such that we could actually start automating a lot of those pieces, right? And so that's where it was a fundamentally different problem, where not only are we able to do the coordination between the surgery date itself, any scheduling of the pre-anesthesia testing, any pre-op workup, anesthesia
Yeah.
clearance, prior auth, et cetera. And the AI's job is not just to surface information, it's to execute all of those manual steps on behalf of the department itself. So it's actually just kind of a journey of the trajectory of AI in healthcare, right? Where we started 8 years ago, very manual machine learning NLP, where everything still had to be done by a human, and then creating a brand new product where, hey, the paradigm's completely different. You have to think about automation first, what can be automated, and then what should be automated, and kind of back out from there. And so the learnings were, yeah, I mean, it was just really just thinking about it completely differently, but it's all still about situational awareness. You just don't need 300 people sitting in a central room together with dashboards on the wall. You could orchestrate everything asynchronously through
Right.
the AI agents.
Yeah, and you now kind of walking through like the large sales cycles and huge compliance and IT, I guess, reviews and stuff like that that you kind of have to deal with, and these kind of things kind of frankly kill startups, and then they're kind of running, as we kind of previously talked about this, for 9 to 12 months or even longer. What is the one thing like Assort does early in the cycle that moves things much more faster? And that could be like with engaging with these health systems or like, finding much more people for trust networks. Like, how does a sort kind of make things move much more faster?
Yeah, I will say the number one thing you can do, and it sounds unsexy, but it's just what works, is really do good, deep discovery.
Mm.
You need to understand that the problems that you solve are real, and the health system is actually feeling those problems, and whether there's a strategic need to solve those problems. Because some problems are felt, but they aren't strategic enough to solve in this fiscal year, or it's not top of mind. And you need to DQ those right away and move on. I mean, it's a numbers game at the end of it all, right? Not every health system will have the problems you solve as a priority every time you talk to them. And so that is fundamentally the first thing. Is there a strategic fit? Is there to the problem that you're solving? Is it an acute enough problem at the health system? And so that's kind of the basics. That's the best way to identify whether or not you're going to go quicker or slower, right? The second part of it is really understanding the budget dynamics and what it takes to get there. I think you could be left in deal purgatory with health systems if you let the tail wag the dog. If you're always asking them, hey, what's next? What do you recommend as next steps? They'll have 18 months worth of meetings with you before you really even figure out what the next step is, right?
Mm.
So you actually have to concretely push, hey, this is a strategic imperative. It's a burning platform for you. What is the path to partner? And by when do you actually need something? And when are you targeting this? And the sooner you know that, the more you can focus on, okay, what are the things I need to prioritize this deal much later? I can soft roll them because they're not going to make a decision for 10 months. Or, hey, their budget's coming up in the next 6 months and they're actually wanting to solve this in the next fiscal year. Let's move at this very quickly, right? And so that's the best way. And then you can back into, okay, you need something by, month
Yeah.
10. All right, we know you're going to need to clear AI governance. We know we're going to need to clear IT security, IT steering, et cetera, et cetera. What are the other things that we need to clear that are unique to your organization? And if they don't know those informations, that's what you need to probe your champion on. And you need to build them up. A lot of these champions have never made an organizational buying decision. They've
Right.
just been on the receiving end of one. So you
Right.
actually have to educate them how to navigate their organization and push their organization forward. Moreover, if they're not the one that can help push or they don't want to risk their political capital, who are the folks that you need to get in touch with that will put their name on the line and say, yes, I want this and I'm going to put the budget, I'm going to, accelerate this through. And so the second thing is the right set of champions to help navigate all of that, right?
Right.
And then you can walk into, okay, you're going to allocate the budget, you're going to stand up for us, you're going to introduce us to the right people. Now let's do a mutual action plan where week over week we're checking in on all right, what IT steering date are we hitting? All right, we're hitting the date they meet twice a month, and we're targeting the second one in month 8. Perfect. How long does contracting take? 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months? It's a little bit different everywhere, right? So you kind of back up into here are all the things that need to happen. And at the end of it all, it's somewhat project management where you keep them on task. Hey, remember, we got to get this done. We got to get this done today because we got to get this done in 2 weeks because we got to get that done in a month so we can hit this timeline in 6 months from now. And that is the best way to do it. They're still going to move at the speed they're going to move at, but you have to reduce the amount of uncertainty in order to help them move on whatever is the fastest slow path that they're going to take. Because they're all going to be varying levels of slow. You're just going to choose the fastest slow path.
Interesting. Yeah. And I feel like Assort kind of gets like the, I guess, drawback that, there's huge incumbents in the space with Epic, Oracle, and all these guys who can potentially come in and who've already, I guess, built relationships with, I guess, health systems that you guys are looking to go to as well. How does, I guess, Assort kind of compete around that and tell health system execs that trust us over the people that you're already working with at Epic or
I mean, the first thing is knowing the landscape cold. You have to be able to know what everybody else is doing, how they think, how they operate, what their, Epic's been around for 50 years, 40 years, whatever it's been. You have 40 years of pattern recognition and pattern matching you can do on how they solve problems. And so whether it's an incumbent, whether it's a competing software vendor, whether it's one of the big organizations, it's knowing what the competitive landscape is and being able to speak to it effectively. But most importantly is, are you solving a problem that's worth solving for the health system? And that's how we stand out, right? Outpatient revenue grew, 33% year over year over the last 2 to 3 years. Everything is moving outpatient. It's on pace to outdo inpatient revenue in the next 5-7 years. So everybody has to figure out an outpatient strategy. However, the revenue of a health system comes primarily from surgeries and procedures. And so you know that the biggest bottleneck, even though the primary care front door is important, it's not where the economics are being felt. Primary care is a loss leader. Fixing primary care, one, you run into the issue I talked about earlier with the CFO. What is my actual tangible ROI downstream? You're using some sort of loose lifetime patient value number. But if I go into subspecialties right away, especially your surgical subspecialties that everybody wants to get to, that are your main revenue engine, that underutilizing them or overutilizing them is very, very costly, there's very strategic fit there. And then you kind of work backwards from there that, hey, the Epics of the world aren't going to do it because of X, Y, and Z. The competing vendors don't do this. And moreover, we have a moat. We've been doing it for 2.5 to 3 years and 150 million patient interactions. And so nobody has that experience in this depth that we do. And moreover, it directly impacts your top line revenue and your bottom line. And you're not going to grow as a health system, and you're going to lose patients to your competitors if you don't solve this problem. And there's nobody else that's solving it, right? So yes, they are going to go Epic first, but you have to understand, or EMR first, or incumbent first, but you have to understand how you stack up against them, and your problem is still worth solving in that context. And in this day and age, you can't be a point solution. You have to be a platform, and you have to have some level of referenceability across the platform as well. So I think that's the benefit that Assort has moving into any health system, regardless of incumbents, is the fact that we've got referenceability across the entire ambulatory care continuum, and we handle the hard problems in specialty care that nobody else does.
being a platform instead of like just a regular point solution. I think one of the things that's really interesting is that you guys are very, I guess, vertical, but also horizontal, obviously, at the same time. Very healthcare specific, but also specialty agnostic, very when it comes to subspecialties, like whether that be orthopedics or, as you mentioned, surgical specialties. How does it work for like a regular, organization that is very horizontal in nature, where it's not just healthcare that they focus on, but maybe law and consulting, whatever it is, but also healthcare is a subcomponent versus a sort just being very healthcare specific. Does that kind of affect or matter so much that you got in general, like when it comes to confidence and accessibility, or does being like vertical in healthcare matter much more than just being radically, I guess, horizontal?
So first, on the horizontal side, I do
Mhm.
want to give credit where credit is due, right? In that healthcare has so many low-hanging fruit problems that being a horizontal player and just doing call deflection, FAQ answering, basic blocking and tackling still provides an outsized ROI. The question is not, hey, can you provide some modicum of ROI in healthcare? The question is, if we're trying to fundamentally change the way that ambulatory operations work, what is required to do so? And you have to do that in order to make sure some of these health systems survive in the next 5 to 10 years with some of the regulatory changes are coming. And so that's where going vertical makes sense, right? You're actually able to take a bigger piece of the pie and actually solve more problems versus fewer problems. And moreover, your EMR is going to solve all the low-hanging fruit stuff too, right? I mean, they're already in there in these health systems. They're already able to stand up things very quickly at a pace they've never been able to do with all the coding tools that are available. And so unless you're willing to go verticalized and deep, you're just going to get unseated by these EMRs when they eventually launch these things in the next 18 months or so. So you have a shelf life if you're going horizontal. But that being said, there's a lot of value for the horizontal work based off of what's already, based off of how bad healthcare operations are starting from on a baseline. But that being said, the thing to keep in mind is that the reason why healthcare is so complex is and why it requires the verticalization is because the number of permutations required for decision making when you get into specialty care and nuanced clinical triage
Yeah.
bloats, right? It's very easy to make a primary care appointment. There's 3 appointment types. Any provider can see the patient, and if you get the wrong appointment type, it's really not that big of a risk. But when you're talking about subspecialty care for patient that is already constrained, we have access issues. We're down 1.9 million providers, I think, by 2035. You
Right.
have to utilize those resources effectively, and the only way to be able to be an expert at that is actually developing the rules logic and the complexity logic that's required. And if you think about it, everything in the ambulatory care continuum eventually resolves to a calendar slot, right? And so that's not the hard part. Scheduling and putting a patient on a calendar is commoditized. It's everything upstream to make sure the patient shows up with the right preparation, with the right provider, with the right authorization, with the right, at the right time in the right sequence, and has all of that set up. And that is what requires going deep, right? So a specialty care referral for orthopedics isn't just, hey, do you need a wellness visit and a flu
Yeah.
shot, et cetera? It's, what is your chief complaint? To route to the right subspecialist, right? Do you need a spine ortho person? Do you need a joint? Do you need hand? Do you need sports medicine? Do you need physical therapy? Determine the type of appointment that you need. Verify that you can actually see somebody without a prior authorization. Check the global period constraints with your insurance company. Confirm the prep protocol. Match to the provider preferences. Even within a clinic, provider A might take patients with an MRI within 60 days. Provider B is okay with 6 months.
Yeah.
And you have to know all of those nuances in order to be able to do this effectively. And the reason why, and all of this is institutional logic in people's heads. It's not written down anywhere. You can't train on it through the chart. You can't train on it through just SOPs. You have to have done these over and over again. And the only way you do it at this depth is by being a specialist and going deep and going vertical. And so, but that being said, it's not sufficient to just go vertical on one side. We started this conversation on with platforms. So you have to be able to go deep enough for every part of the care continuum to be able to drive the value that's needed for the organizations themselves. So I think there's a place for horizontal AI in healthcare. I think a lot of it's been done. There's going to be a lot of low-hanging fruit that falls over the next year or so. But a lot of these horizontal players, my prediction is just won't be here, or will have changed their business model, or will have decided to go deep in the next
Interesting.
18 to 24 months because they're going to have to, because the EMRs will unseat a lot of the work.
Yeah. This might be a stupid, naive question, but what changes in a sort strategy from specialty to specialty, from orthopedics to a surgical care specialty? Like, is there anything in the data flow or workflow that changes depending on the
Yeah.
specialty? Or
The rules are all different, right? From orthopedics to cardiology to ENT to neurology, right? And so that's why we went specialty by specialty. There's no
okay,
shortcut here.
yeah,
We went specialty by specialty. We're at 24 specialties now. We want to be at 27 by the end of the year. And, you have to build it brick by brick. on that. Now, as far as taking other specialties live, I mean, it's a lot more trivial for us now because we've done so many of them. So we have a rules engine that everybody starts from a baseline, but then we work with the organizations to kind of essentially develop the last mile. Which would be, hey, what are the provider-specific nuances in your organization? But our rules engine is able to handle all of that nuance, specialty to specialty.
I was very curious. Is like once like a health system CFO, they says yes to okay, Imad, I'm ready to go with the store. This is amazing. How does the workflow management start or look like once the yes hits a sort's table? Who do you guys kind of line up to help this health system, and how fast does the integration happen? Like, and because one important process and topic is that integration and making it as easy is obviously very important. How do you guys kind of maintain that?
Yeah. I will say in this day and age, if you're doing it right, the technical piece is actually the easiest piece now. Once we get access to the IT resources on the client side, from a technology build perspective, we're talking timelines of 7 to 12 weeks, right? Depending on the complexity of the organization and the size and scope that we start with. The hard part is not the technical part anymore. It is all of the operational part, right? It's people, process, and not technology, people, process. And so you have to make sure you're doing the right change management. You have to work with the right organizational stakeholders to educate the teams. There's a lot of boogeyman conversation around AI and automating away jobs, and it's really more about capacity maximization than it is about actually taking jobs away. The demand for healthcare is not going down, it's only going up, right? So there will always be a need for these folks in healthcare. The same staff can handle more versus needing to add incremental staff. And so we'll work with the IT department to get the IT resources, but then we're working with your call center directors, your VPs of population health, your ACO leaders, and even sometimes your health plan leaders if we're doing value-based care gap closures with you, et cetera, and then working with backwards. All right, what are the rules that apply specifically to you? Here's our national database of rules. What are the rules on your side? Let's actually reconcile them. Let's get sign off on that. What is the training? What is the change management? What is the education and communication plan that needs to happen? How are we educating your affiliate providers that their patients are going to get calls from these AIs? How are we educating your employed providers that these calls are going to come from the AI, or patients going to, AI is going to answer these calls?
Yeah.
How do you make sure that you build in the right language to make sure patients are as comfortable as possible and your patient population is as comfortable as possible? Because the patient population in metropolitan New York is different than the patient population in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, right? And so you need to meet the patients where they are and meet the health system where they are. And then there's the concern about the AI automation, right? Nobody wants the AI running around and making decisions independently on its own. So there's guardrails around how we take the agents live. You start in month 1 with a subset of calls that are all human and manually audited. And then you show the outcomes of those audited calls. And then you go to the AI governance committee and say, hey, here's the results of all of the calls based off the framework that we put together in the sales process or the implementation process.
Yep.
And then you do some more, and then you do some more. And so by month 3, you're essentially live and automated across the board, but you were dotting I's and crossing T's across along the way to make sure that you were establishing trust.
Assort, I guess recently you guys launched Assort Activate, which is more of an AI agent for, I guess, that proactively reaches the patients for, filling care gaps and things. Can you talk more about why you guys kind of expanded the product line, and what was the reception of health systems to this product? Are they willing to adopt it more, or are they just, waiting to see, the metrics of how this specific expansion does?
So moving from inbound to outbound, or adding outbound to our inbound components, was really a shift from reactive to proactive, and creating a system, or moving from a system that waits for patients to call to a system that essentially accepts the responsibility and says, I'm going to go ahead and ensure the care happens. So the way I would like to think about it is think about every access point we've set up for patients, whether
Yeah.
it's a phone number, whether it's a online scheduling, whether it's through my charts or patient portal scheduling, et cetera. All of it is dependent on the patient taking action on their care. And technology exists so that the patient should never have to do that, right? It's that we create this complexity in this system, and we ask patients to go navigate the complexity that the system has created. That's unfair, right? And technology has evolved to a point where we can say, we've created this complexity, here's all the stuff you need to navigate. We're going to reach out to you and make sure you don't fall through the cracks. And so that was really the philosophical change. And it's because When you're doing the inbound side and handling millions of inbound calls like we do, you see essentially the shadow of the patients who are never called. There's open referrals sitting there unscheduled for weeks at a time. There are care gaps that were flagged months ago, and the patient has not shown up to close that care gap. There were no-shows that happened on the schedule, and those patients never came back in for care. So the inbound product was capturing the demand that showed up at your door, but Activate was built for the demand that never made it to your door, essentially. And so the signal from the customers is that it was exactly that. They pulled us towards it, that, hey, your voice AI is already great in handling all of this. Could you also just call the patients? I've got referrals coming in through my fax. I've got patients who need colonoscopies that haven't gotten them yet, or mammographies that haven't gotten them yet. Can you just deploy the same agent and turn it around and help this part of our practice? And that's the best way to build something new, right? When your customers are saying, hey, I love your one part, can you build the second part? And when we took a step back and looked at it and be like, yeah, absolutely, let's fundamentally transform how ambulatory operations are practiced, because the patient should never, the system should be reaching out to the patients and navigating their care.
Yeah, 100%. And I think proactive outreach does also arguably have a trust issue on the patient side when, like, a patient doesn't really know if the call is coming from, I guess, the provider or a vendor or potential spam, how, for example, someone looking for, unnecessary money from them. How does Assort usually navigate that? And what does the current patient experience and data show as well?
Yeah. So first, it's kind of the unsexy stuff. A lot of the answers is that, hey, it's the unsexy stuff,
Yeah.
but it's the educating the community, right? When I talked about provider outreach and educating them and letting their patients know that, hey, this AI agent's available, or when you call in, the AI agent's going to be there. But, as when you talk to interacting with the patient, one, we also have to keep in mind, everybody asks about how the patient's going to interact with the AI agent, forgetting the fact that patients are doing this with almost every other company they interact with, right? When something goes wrong with Amazon, you're interacting with an AI agent to fix it. When your airline, Delta or United, doesn't do anything right, when you call the service desk, you're interacting with an agent. Comcast, your cable provider, internet provider, it's all over the place. So it's not about, are patients going to feel comfortable? They're already comfortable, right? What they care about is that whatever they're interacting with is sophisticated enough to answer their problems or answer their questions. That is what fundamentally matters. Now, there's stuff around it, which is, infrastructure stuff. The phone number we use for outbound is a phone number provisioned by our partner, right? So on the caller ID, if it says whatever organization it is, it's coming from a doctor or a healthcare organization first. And then, you get into the basic stuff. The AI picks up and it identifies itself as an AI calling on behalf of the practice. It also references some of your actual clinical context. So it builds that trust that, hey, it's not a generic outreach. It's tailored to you. It's specific to you. And you make it clear to the patient that they can exit this AI workflow whenever they want, right? And so that when they say operator or say, hey, can you call me back later? Or I don't want to talk to you, I want to talk to a human. That's where, they know that they can do that and you route them effectively.
And
So once the AI demonstrates the awareness of their specific needs, demonstrates intelligence and ability to answer and handle their needs, we find that the trust gets built very quickly. And every patient gets a survey after a call, and we're averaging about 4.5 out of 5 of patient satisfaction with our AI. So, but we keep tabs on all of that, right? Whenever patients are saying that they're unsatisfied, what happened, what went wrong, that's where our sophisticated rules engine really shines, is now that turns into feedback learning from an existing callback back to the model itself.
yeah, I've been seeing a lot of companies or startups working in the kind of like healthcare call optimization space, whether that be for primary care or for subspecialties in general. And I guess it's because it's a huge market. How is Assort relatively looking at that competition? And do you think this is going to be like like a multiple player game, or a one person, one company takes all, or will it be like an Anthropic, open AI thing? Like how will it look overall?
Yeah, and you're seeing some of this already.
Yeah.
CIOs I talk to are already asking about consolidation, right? We're in an arms race, essentially. I think the shelf life is probably 24 to 36 months at the moment. And so in about 24 months, probably sooner for some organizations, they're going to pull up and say, hey, we've been experimenting with AI agents for the past 4 or 5 years now. We kind of know what good looks like. We know what we need. We know what we want. We know what works, what doesn't work. Who are my AI vendors that serve as the AI backbone of my health system? Your EMR is already going to be grandfathered in, so that's there.
Yeah.
And then you have room for maybe a one vendor for outpatient, one vendor for hospital inpatient, and then one vendor for back office. And from a CIO perspective, ideally, one vendor solves multiple of those verticals or multiple of those verticals. And so, yeah, I mean, it's all about building the platform itself, going as deep as and wide as possible. And I think it will end up consolidating down to a few vendors in the long run. Now, that being said, there's all sorts of sizes of healthcare organizations out there. You have your Common Spirits and Kaisers of the world, which are massive, and they'll have different vendor profiles that service them. You have your small to mid-market health systems that are very price sensitive, that don't need all the bells and whistles. They don't even have an ambulatory network that's sophisticated enough for all the bells and whistles,
Yeah.
right? They just need staff augmentation and they're in a tough labor market that they can't hire, so they just need to more primitive tools for that. Then you have the provider group, independent provider group, which runs the gambit from 1 to 2 doc shops with their own shingle all the way up to, 2,000 provider MSOs. And that'll be, a profile as well. We kind of do both, but that's what we're seeing. And yeah, I mean, it's going as fast as possible and going as deep as possible. There's no substitute at the moment if you want to survive in the next 36 months. And whether it's going to be OpenAI or Anthropic or any one of those, I doubt it, just because, one, they're competing against each other. And there's just a fundamental consumer play that they need to get right. The question is, how much time and effort and bandwidth can they actually spend on healthcare? And are they willing to go as deep as it takes to do this right? Right? I mean, there might be some fringe cases that they use, but at the end of the day, I think OpenAI and even Palantir's approaches are more, hey, we've got this model framework and we help you build your AI agents. And it's attractive to health systems because every health system's been trying to become their own dev shop, but they're just not they're IT organizations. They're not product-led organizations. So you have to have that product management rigor and muscle. Then there's total cost of ownership and long-term maintenance. So you have to make it as easy as possible. And these organizations are running on 1 to 10% margins, sometimes negative margins, right? So they don't have the bandwidth to, like Epic makes you, hire 300 analysts in order to install Epic. They just don't have the bandwidth for another one of those, right? And having to hire 10 to 15 engineers just to support your platform. And how long are you actually going to subsidize them using your platform, right? Eventually the VC dollars run out. So I just don't think it's going to be a big horizontal player.
Yeah, absolutely. In that case specifically, you mentioned Anthropic and OpenAI, but they both have an OpenAI for healthcare, Anthropic healthcare, and they're currently coming in with helping kind of maximize the provider time for the patient, etc. Has this ever been brought up? I assume a lot, like almost every single conversation you have with the health system with OpenAI, Anthropic, maybe potentially coming to them and saying, "Hey, come to us instead. Why choose Assort over OpenAI?" Is that something that's happening a lot, or is that not really happening in the patient or in the call race right now?
Yeah, I would say take this as an N of one. These are just conversations I'm having. Somebody else might have a different experience,
Yeah.
but it's not showing up as much in my conversations. I think people take a look and then kind of recognize, you have to acknowledge or realize that these health system executives have been burned by technology so many times, right?
Sure.
They are not just chopping at the bit for every new shiny thing anymore. When we literally jammed EMRs down their throat, these were all very terrible pieces of software that they all were forced to get. Otherwise, they were going to get penalized with their Medicare reimbursement. So they took very bad software, had to live with it for 10 years until some of these EMRs actually got their act together and made it easier to work with. And then they were sold, ML companies and AI companies and automation companies and radiology companies and all of these things that never really added up. And so they're more skeptical of new technology than anything else. And I think they're actually more sophisticated buyers because of the amount of times they've failed. And so I just don't think they're going to get excited about every shiny new thing. It has to be something with staying power. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
They're looking at 5 to 10 year investment horizons, right? They don't want a company that's going to be gone in 2 years or 3 years because they couldn't compete. So you have to be vertical, but you also have to have size but you have to be specialized to their needs. You can't just be trying to get a piece of the pie. You have to actually be playing in the space.
Yeah. Two more questions before quick rapid fire here. Where in healthcare operations do you think AI kind of helped the most, and where did it mostly harm the most, and people are regretting adopting this specific AI tool in this specific vertical?
That's a great question. I think it's been helping and been largely successful in high value, like rules-based tasks that previously required human judgment. Like if it was something that was based off decision trees and pretty straightforward
Yeah.
workflows, all of that, I think AI has been able to automate, and you're actually seeing outcome there. You have the opportunity to have clear success criteria, measurable ROI, defined failure modes, edge cases, escalation criteria. I think that's where AI has done well and will continue to do well. I think that anything that purports to be AI recommendations that nobody acts on, right? Or intelligent dashboards that surface insights without changing behavior, or doing,
Yeah.
general purpose AI that handles the first two questions well and then falls apart on the third question and needs to escalate to a human. I think that's where organizations are being burned. Like, it's very easy to put together AI demos right now, and they're being sold based off of AI demos. And then when you put something into production, and they're seeing that, hey, you're really only answering FAQs and you're only really doing operator rules and routing patients to different departments, that's not a resolution rate. That's not what it takes. Like, we need full end-to-end workflows here. So I think that's where a lot of the failures have happened and a lot of the learnings have occurred, that now they're becoming a lot more sophisticated around, this is what good looks like and this is what I need to see.
Yeah. If you could fast forward maybe like 3 years, what does like an AI native health system front office actually look like overall?
Man, I mean, ideally, it's a health system or an organization with zero hold time. There's no phones ringing in the kind of traditional sense of the way we think about it. The vast majority of patient interactions are handled end-to-end by AI, with human escalations for the cases that actually require it and require human decision-making. Referrals are processed within minutes rather than days. Proactive outreach is continuous. It's personalized. The system knows who needs what and reaches out before the patient even knows about it or spends energy thinking about it. Patient access coordinators, who used to spend their day on hold with insurance companies and scheduling calls, are now doing case management and care navigation and the work that actually requires human judgment and human connection, most importantly. But, the reality is all of this technology exists today, right? I mean, the deployment, I joke that technology solved healthcare 3 years ago. At least the non-clinical side of it. The rest that's remaining is the human problem, the trust problem, the not a capability problem, right? So, and the health systems that'll have that move now will have structural advantages over the ones that wait for the category to fully mature. And I think this is probably one of the ways that, and now I'm going on a little tangent here, where health systems for the first time are having competition in ways they never did before, right? Because when you can make the ease of access or the patient experience or the access so easy, patients actually remember you now. And maybe now they're lobbying their employers to make sure you're included in their network or the insurance company's network, because it's just so easy to navigate. And if you wait, a lot of these geographies are competitive. Patients are just going to move across the street. I live in San Francisco. There's 4 health systems I can go to.
Yeah.
And so I love that choice. And I know one that infuriates me with all of their outreaches from the patient portal, and I avoid them like the plague. But I'm also maybe a little bit more sophisticated than your average bear there.
Right. I mean, I'm curious though, if one health system adopts Assort Health and maybe a competitor of theirs figures that out, what does that look like? Do they reach out to you like, oh my goodness, these guys adopted Assort Health, it's potentially helping them a lot or will help them a lot. Maybe we have to adopt them, or maybe we have to start looking in this sector a lot to increase our margins. Have you seen that kind of fold out?
There's actually been a couple of wonderful examples where somebody was doing Googling or trying to get familiar with the market, and they just picked up the phone and called one of our clinics and had an interaction with our AI agent, and we're like, oh man, this is amazing, and just called us. So if they get wind that their competitor is doing it across the street and they pick up the phone, call, and see how seamless the experience is, they absolutely want it. And I love saying that that's actually happening.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, quick rapid fire here. Are you ready, Imad?
I mean, yeah, not without knowing the questions, absolutely.
Okay, what is one metric every health system actually cares about?
I mean, in general, revenue. I mean,
Yeah.
it's unfortunate that that's the reality of our healthcare system, but that's it.
Yeah.
Am I having enough revenue?
Yeah. What is one thing founders always get wrong about procurement, or that maybe health systems tell you as well?
I think one, everybody underestimates, at least
Yeah.
with health systems, how vast and complex the procurement process is. I think founders also underestimate the number of people it takes to become your champion. To get, you might get a few health systems here and there by one person doing some heroic effort, but that's not the norm. But most importantly, you gotta sell the problem you're solving, not the software. And I think that's something that founders struggle with a lot because you spent how many years in a basement or sacrificing a nice paycheck creating this software and perfecting it. You're very excited about this software, as you should be, but people buy problems being solved. They don't buy the technology. They probably don't even care the way that the technology solves it, as long as it solves it in a way that's more cost effective than whatever their status quo is. So I think that's one thing they also forget is sell the problem you're solving, don't sell the software.
Very true. I mean, and that kind of leads to the next one is what is like specific one piece of advice for a founder kind of taking their first hospital meeting with maybe someone in exec to kind of evaluate their technology?
Show up with the degree that health systems need you to show up.
Yeah.
Think about who these execs are talking to. They have McKinsey and Bain and Premier and Epic and private equity groups and VC firms all working with them constantly. That is the level of fit, finish, and professional polish that's required to interact with the health system. That sends a lot more credibility than anything else. You also have to know them cold. You cannot treat them generic. And I mean, I love health systems and they all tell me they're snowflakes. Really, there's really 5 permutations of a health system. Really, I've kind of seen all of them. And I know within about 5 or 10 minutes to talk to you what kind of health system you are. But I can never let you know that. I need you to feel like you're special. I need you to feel like that what I put in front of you will be bespoke to you in a way that, it's not to someone else. And you have to be able to walk the walk on that one, right? It's not just telling them it's going to be bespoke, but showing them that, hey, here's how we take your context and your information, your patient population, et cetera. So I'd say, those are the things that I would keep in mind going in front of health systems, especially if you've never done it before.
Most people haven't. I mean, it's like a hard thing to do. Like, I mean, even just getting to the door of an evaluation process is very difficult. It can take, 1 to 1.5 years. I mean, depending on who you have. And as we've kind of talked about in the call, it's about working smarter, not harder. And is one of the most important things overall. But kind of going into like, what is like one thing front desk staff do that AI still really cannot do?
I mean, everything in person, right? Unless there's a robot sitting in your waiting room, which has its own level of creep factor, I guess. Everything that needs to happen in the waiting room. Front desk staff are also repurposed a lot to do kind of negotiation with third parties, right? And it's not just as simple as appeals letters to provider or to insurance companies or home health or SNF or anything like that. It's actually working and blocking and tackling some very complex problems that just require back and forth and information that's not structured, that's not available anywhere to pull from to make a decision on. But that being said, I think it is increasingly becoming less and less where you do need true front desk people staffing phones or, interacting with the technology. You can actually have them really interacting with the patients and giving your patients a great experience in the office.
Very true. Last question here. What is the biggest or best advice someone gave you that you did not listen to?
That is a great question. When I had my company, we started with radiation oncology and we had a really good product market fit. And while it was great product market fit, and this was back when a lot of these clinics were independent and not owned by health systems or hospitals, they were paying me $300 per provider for the software that we had, and it was great. But these organizations were paying, the biggest ones were paying maybe 15, 20 grand a year, right? And I got introduced to some health systems, and they were flashing numbers like 75 grand, 100 grand, and those were kind of rounding errors to them. So I got very, I started seeing the dollar signs, I guess, and I asked advisors, hey, I'm going after this. I think we need to double down on health systems, blah, blah. And this was my first foray into healthcare. So I did not fully appreciate how long and complex these sales cycles were. And so whereas these radiation oncology clinics were closing in weeks, right? Days and weeks sometimes. Yeah. I was told by a couple of advisors, do not focus on health systems right now. Round out radiation oncology clinics, build your business, and then, maybe focus on the, hospital systems and health systems once you have some cash flow coming in. And I did not listen to that, and I should have.
But Imad, this was amazing to have you on the show, and I enjoyed this so much. It was a pure joy. So thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate it.
I appreciate it, Vic. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.